So let me push back on that good news and dampen it, if I may, because I think, first and foremost, you're right. We collectively have not taken a moment to really acknowledge how remarkable it is that scientists were able, in such a short time, come up with a vaccine that saved lives. I mean, it's remarkable. It's to the point where people are like, a pandemic, even though it's still around and kills people, right? But like, people can resume their lives for the most part. The flip side to that, Zachary, is now we're living in 2023, where the same people who champion vaccines, like Ron DeSantis, are campaigning for their 2024 election campaign by attacking science. Literally, attacking science, attacking vaccines, attacking the vaccine makers, where ignorance and being dumb about literature and books and history is rewarded. And hospitals and doctors are being attacked because people are saying that they're part of this quote-unquote groomer conspiracy. Vaccine hesitancy is now a top 10 global threat according to the World Health Organization. And otherwise brilliant people who should know better will rather flirt with death than take a vaccine, and would rather their children potentially get COVID or shot at school than read a book written by Toni Morrison. So the flip to that is everything you said is right. But folks are saying, in my lifetime, I have never seen otherwise intelligent folks reject vaccines and literally dance with the angel of death. Because what you just stated were facts, but facts don't matter anymore. Because people make up their own facts. People feel their facts. So, if you look at the arc of history, especially American history, it takes time, step by step. Women didn't have the right to vote. Gay folks weren't allowed to be married. People who looked like me weren't allowed to come to America, thanks to the 1965 Immigration Nationality Act. But we've never really dealt with this type of propaganda at this level being consumed by so many people at the same time. How do we get to that progress point? How do we move forward as a collective if collectively we are sharing different realities?
Yeah, I mean, my response to some of that is, and I have talked about that over the years during Trump. So in a nutshell, right, if you were going to describe my attitudes towards Trump, it would have been, he's an odious authoritarian narcissist. But the idea that American history was like dancing along in a nice, simple, Marquess of Queensberry rules of polite engagement where people of different opinions genteelly engaged one another in a consensual democracy where we all kind of worked out our problems is both a liberal and conservative myth of our past. And that we have this real tendency to kind of look at our past on both sides, right? Liberals look at the 1960s and go, wow, isn't it great? We passed the Civil Rights Act. We passed the Voting Rights Act. We created Medicare. We created Medicaid. We remediated the broken promise of the New Deal. And it was great. We're done. We did it. We did it. We did it. And then the right kind of does like we're the self-correcting mechanism. At the end, we all come together. I think the reality is, anti-science, anti-elitism, heartland versus coasts, hatred of technocrats and people who think they know better, and the scorn that those currents are powerful in American society, powerful. And I think at some point, too many people forgot the underside of who we always have been. And therefore, I don't look at what's going on in the present with nearly the same degree of despair, almost because I look at the past with, I hope, a much more realistic view of just how problematic we've always been. So I don't necessarily see us as backsliding. I see us as back to your kind of ebb and flow, but it's more, there's a lot of unrequited promises and unresolved problems that the past few years I think have made impossible to ignore. And I, there's a scenario in which the hobgoblins of our nature that have been kept at bay by elite institutions and other stuff are finally unleashed and will never be put back and are going to consume us. So that's one possible trajectory. The other is, in order to really ever move forward, those forces have to be seen in the light of day. They have to be challenged. And some of the people who support them are not supporting them because they buy into them. They're supporting them for other reasons. That also has to be dealt with and addressed. So, here too, some of how we see what's going on in the present will perforce depend on how we look back at it in the future. Meaning, some of these issues we will either see as the harbingers of something really bad, or we will see them as the cresting of something that finally got pushed back. And, I don't know the answer to that.
Is there then, in this moment, right? Because I often say that I believe that there comes a point in our lives, in society, where the systems that we're supposed to carry, the systems that we're supposed to work, break down. They were created in a different time for different people, right? And that in that breakdown, the breaking down of things is necessary, right? There needs to be some type of great excavation that happens, a great unearthing, in order for us to till new land, right? Whether that is emotionally, intellectually, right? To till new land in order to create something new. But that in order for the new to come, right, there is a destruction, a breakdown that needs to happen. I'm wondering, though, in your, in your understanding and in your research and of like this country and the world, is there ever a time when the breakdown that occurs and then the rising that follows isn't one that is violent? Because where my concern and where my mind often goes as we see escalated rhetoric, towards particular groups, whether it's anti-Blackness, anti-Semitism, anti-LGBTQ. I'm here in New York, and there was just a woman arrested for burning a gay flag in Soho, of all places, and now is being charged 30 years old with a hate crime. And I'm saying to myself, is there a way? Has there ever been a way for societies to move through without violence being the on-ramp to this change?
Look, it's a really good question. A lot of human history has been marked by, spurts and outgrowth of intense violence in the face of, intense wrongs. I suppose to some degree, the reality is that the civil rights movement in the United States, while there was definitely violence, the protesters were attacked, they were beaten, there were certainly some who were murdered. The amount of violence proportional to the amount of change was not. It was a pretty favorable ratio, meaning most of that was in fact peaceful, most of that was bodies on the streets, most of that was done without the kind of violence you're talking about. And frankly, I think, absent truly authoritarian governments, of which there are a handful in the world, but they're not a huge number, right? We can kind of name them. I mean, there's Iran and North Korea, and Syria isn't even. It's a repressive failed state like South Sudan and Congo. A lot of the change, because it's so much of what we do now is so digital. Both our rage and our hope and our communication. And it's a really interesting question about whether or not, like, mass violence as an outgrowth of a system breaking down is really in the cards, or whether we've actually gotten almost too good at creating a framework, like a material, sustainable framework. A la what we did in 2020, we just spent a lot of money, and instead of society completely unraveling, people just made do. So. Look, I don't know the answer to that question in the future. I think the world in general is just less violent. The fact that we pay attention to the places where it is intensely violent doesn't actually mean that it is more violent on kind of per capita average. And I guess I do believe that we are much more likely to be in this just like chaotically noisy roilingness more than we are likely to be in a situation of literal civil war. There's a lot of rhetorical civil war.